Get them to stop screaming or find yourself another job. Vivian St. James didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words sliced clean through the morning silence like a scalpel. The night nanny, wide-eyed trembling, stood at the edge of the foyer, clutching her handbag like a life vest. "They don't listen to me, Ms. St. James. They cry for hours. They say he's still in the car." Vivian's eyes didn't flinch. "Then I suggest you don't let them speak of it again." The woman opened her mouth, closed it, then turned and walked out the glass doors, disappearing into the pale New York morning. The echo of her heels barely faded before Vivian tapped her phone. "B," she said sharply. "We need someone new. Immediately." Upstairs, twin cries pierced the silence, Hazel's shrill and wild, Harper's broken and low. It was the 92nd night in a row. Vivian had tracked them with clinical precision. 92. She'd called specialists, therapists, hypnotists, even a grief counselor who charged 5 figures an hour, and still the screaming, still the shadows under her eyes, still the silence in the master bedroom. She rubbed her temple eyes dry but raw. "This house is not a hospital," she muttered to herself. "It is not a grave." By noon, a man stood at the back entrance. He wore a faded navy jacket, scuffed boots, and held a folded piece of paper in one hand, an agency badge with the name barely legible, Caleb Morrow. B met him at the service gate. "You're here to clean, not counsel." "Understood," she said, inspecting him like a surgeon assessing faulty equipment. Caleb nodded once. "I just need the hours." She eyed him again. Mid to late 30s, brown eyes like burnt honey, quiet, too quiet. But something about him felt grounded, not eager, not afraid. B led him through the staff corridor, whispering as they passed. "Don't speak to the girls. Don't sing. Don't whistle. If they talk to you, nod and keep walking." Caleb nodded again. "And for heaven's sake, don't stand near the nursery door." Vivian had the last janitor escorted off the premises for that. Understood. But the moment they passed the second-floor landing, something shifted. From behind a cracked bedroom door, a child's voice drifted. "He's back. The one in the water." Then came the scream, guttural, terrified, primal. Vivian appeared almost instantly at the top of the staircase, her heels clicking like a gavel. She didn't look at Caleb, only at B. "Why is there a man in my house?" "He's the new night janitor," B said, composed. Agency cleared. "Does he know the rules?" "I do," Caleb said calmly. Vivian's eyes finally landed on him. They were the eyes of a woman who had once loved deeply and then sealed that part of herself inside a vault labeled "Do Not Reopen." Cold, calculating, and infinitely tired. "Fine," she said. "Start tonight. Not before 6, out by midnight." She turned away but paused at the top step. "If my daughter so much as lose a minute of sleep because of you—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Caleb simply nodded, and then she vanished down the hallway. That night, the house was a museum. Polished marble floors, glass that gleamed like ice, silence so thick it felt like judgment. Caleb moved slowly, methodically, wiping, dusting, scrubbing. Never near the girls' rooms, never near the master wing. He listened to the house breathe, groans settle into its stillness. At 9:17 p.m., as he knelt to clean the baseboards near the library, a soft thud echoed from upstairs. Then a whisper, then another, then crying. He paused, hands resting on the rag. The twins were awake. Of course they were. Then something strange happened. A soft shuffle, a squeak, small feet, and then Harper, in her pajamas, tiny, solemn, clutching a stuffed giraffe by one ear. She stood at the top of the grand staircase, looking down at the man who wasn't supposed to be there. Caleb said nothing. He didn't even rise. He simply looked at her with quiet, unblinking warmth. She didn't speak, just sat at the top stair and watched. He returned to cleaning slowly, rhythmically, never looking up again. After 5 minutes, she was gone. 10 minutes later, the crying stopped, and for the first time in 92 nights, silence stayed. At 6:01 a.m., Vivian stormed down the hallway, her phone in hand. She didn't wake up, she said aloud, breath caught between hope and panic. Hazel didn't wake up. She opened the bedroom door. Both girls were asleep, peacefully. No tears, no tossing, just the rise and fall of breath like waves on a quiet shore. B appeared behind her. The janitor's gone. Vivian blinked. Who told him to leave early? No one. He left exactly at midnight. Vivian glanced once more at the girls, then at the silent hallway, then toward the front of the house. She didn't believe in miracles, but something had happened, and she didn't like not knowing what. They didn't scream, not once. Vivian stood by the nursery door, her arms crossed tightly across her chest like she was bracing for an earthquake that never came. The girls were still asleep. Sunlight spilled through the curtains. Outside, the city pulsed with traffic and ambition, but inside the room, the silence was sacred. B watched her carefully. First night in 3 months. Vivian didn't answer. Her eyes lingered on Hazel, who had twisted herself into a soft cocoon of blankets. One arm dangled over the edge of the bed, fingers curled loosely around the ear of her favorite stuffed rabbit. Peace like that didn't just appear, not in this house, not after what they'd been through. Maybe it was a fluke, Vivian said coldly, turning away. Don't get sentimental. I'm not, B replied. But maybe, just maybe we've been treating the symptoms, not the wound. Vivian paused halfway down the hall. Get the cameras pulled from last night, she said. I want to know exactly where that man was at every moment. Caleb returned that evening at exactly 5:59 p.m., just as the sun dipped behind the towers of Midtown. He didn't knock. He didn't hesitate. He entered through the staff door, nodded at B, and quietly put on his gloves. Vivian was waiting. I had the security footage reviewed. Caleb didn't flinch. You never entered the nursery wing, never spoke to the children, barely made a sound. He nodded once. That's the job. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing. Then tell me something, Mr. Morrow. Why did my daughter sleep through the night for the first time since their father died? There it was, the word neither of them had dared say until now. Caleb looked at her not directly but gently, like someone approaching a wild animal that had forgotten what safety felt like. I didn't do anything, he said simply. Vivian studied him for a beat longer. Then, like a judge dismissing a witness, she turned and walked away. B.I. watched the entire exchange from the shadow of the hallway. Most people defend themselves more than that, she said once Vivian was gone. Caleb gave her a faint smile. I've learned the truth doesn't need volume, just timing. B nodded, not quite sure whether to be impressed or unnerved. Upstairs, Harper sat at the edge of her bed, sketching in a spiral-bound notebook. Hazel sat beside her, arms wrapped around her knees. The girls had changed. Subtly. Their posture, their voices, like someone had turned down the static inside their heads. Harper whispered, I saw him again. Did he say anything? Hazel asked. Harper paused. No, he was just there, like the nightlight, but taller. They giggled softly, then fell quiet. I don't want Mom to make him leave, Hazel said. Me neither. Harper drew a tall man beside a window. She labeled him the janitor who didn't say anything. That night, Caleb worked as usual. No fuss, no words, just motion and method. But around 10:15 p.m., as he passed the grand staircase, he heard it again, a shuffle of feet. Harper. She sat at the top step, clutching her giraffe. Caleb didn't look up. He continued wiping the railing slow and steady. Mom says you're not supposed to talk to us, she said softly. Caleb paused, then resumed. I think it's because she's scared. Harper continued. She's not scared of monsters. She's scared we'll forget Daddy if we stop crying. That stopped him. He turned to her, his voice barely above a whisper. You don't forget someone by healing. You remember them better. Harper blinked. That's what I told Hazel. But Mom says forgetting is dangerous. He crouched slowly, keeping his distance. Grief isn't forgetting, he said. It's just love with nowhere to go. Harper tilted her head. "Did you lose someone too?" Caleb didn't answer, just offered a tired smile. Then he stood and continued his work. From the shadows, Bee watched the whole exchange. She said nothing, but for the first time in years, her throat tightened with something dangerously close to hope. The next morning, Vivian received a knock on her office door at 7:02 a.m. "Ma'am," Bee said, stepping in. "The girls left something for you." On her desk sat 2 sheets of construction paper. On Hazel's was a drawing a man with a mop and a quiet smile standing in a hallway lit with yellow crayon light. 2 small girls curled nearby, sleeping peacefully. The caption in uneven letters read, "He cleaned the scary out." Vivian stared at it. On Harper's page, he didn't talk. He just made the house feel like it was breathing again. Vivian didn't cry. She hadn't cried in years. But her fingers traced the edge of the crayon and trembled just enough for Bee to pretend not to notice. "That janitor," Vivian said, her voice low. "He doesn't belong here." Bee raised an eyebrow. "No, ma'am, he doesn't." Then she added, "But maybe that's exactly why he does." The light in the kitchen flickered like it was nervous to be on. Vivian leaned over the counter staring into her untouched espresso. The twins had gone back to sleep after breakfast, something that hadn't happened since before the funeral. She should have felt relief, maybe even joy, but all she felt was suspicion. Peace was not something she trusted, not anymore. She opened her tablet and flipped through the security footage from the past 2 nights. Caleb never spoke to the girls, never entered their room, never lingered near them, but they slept, they smiled, they started drawing again. She scrolled to the end of the log. 5:58 a.m. Janitor clocked out. But something was different this time. There was another figure in the footage. A boy. Slim, build, backpack, light brown hoodie. He slipped in from the service entrance around 5:30 a.m., just for a moment, then disappeared behind the greenhouse. Vivian narrowed her eyes. Who is that? That evening before Caleb arrived, she was already waiting near the staff gate. Her heels tapped sharply against the flagstone path. "Mr. Morrow," she said before he even stepped fully into view. "Who was the boy here this morning?" Caleb didn't blink. "That's my son, Mason. You brought a child to my property without informing me. He wasn't on the property. He waited by the garden fence. He likes to sketch while I finish." Vivian's voice iced over. "I run a private residence, not an after-school program." Caleb met her gaze evenly. He didn't disturb anything. "He's not insured to be on site. He didn't step inside." "Still, Ms. St. James," he interrupted, and his tone still calm cut through her protest like cloth under a blade. "You hired me to clean, not to apologize for every breath my family takes." Vivian stared at him momentarily stunned, then turned on her heel. "Make sure it doesn't happen again." Mason was back the next morning. Only this time he didn't stay behind the fence. Harper found him first crouched by the fountain with a notebook in his lap sketching the water patterns like it was some kind of ancient map. His head jerked up when he noticed her. "Oh," he said. "Didn't mean to scare you." "You didn't," Harper said, arms crossed. "Are you the janitor's kid?" "Yeah. I'm Mason." She pointed to the sketch pad. "You draw. I see things better when I draw them. What do you see?" Mason hesitated, then flipped the page. It was a picture of the house, but not how it looked, how it felt. A tall mansion with wide shadows, 2 girls standing in windows that looked like eyes, a woman with no mouth drawn standing behind glass. Harper looked at it for a long time. "You drew us." "Not exactly," Mason said. "I just drew what the house was holding. You're weird." "So are you," Mason said, shrugging. "It's fine. Weird people just see the world deeper. That's why it hurts more." That line hit Harper in the chest like a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You talk like a grown-up," she whispered. "I have to. My dad forgets sometimes that I'm still a kid. He needs someone to remind him the world still has soft corners." They sat quietly. Then Mason reached into his bag and pulled out a lollipop. "Want one?" Harper blinked, then nodded. Bea watched from the kitchen window, arms crossed, something between a smile and a prayer on her face. "Ma'am," she said softly, "you should see this." Vivian walked over reluctantly. Outside, Harper and Mason sat beneath the oak tree, not playing, just sitting, talking like old souls in small bodies. Vivian's expression didn't change, but something in her chest shifted. "These children," Bea murmured, "don't need healing from textbooks. They need people who see them, not their grief." Vivian turned away. "I see them." "No," Bea said gently. "You see their pain, but you don't see them, not yet." Vivian didn't answer. That night, as Caleb mopped the library floors, Mason sat cross-legged nearby, reading aloud from a dog-eared copy of The Little Prince. His voice was soft, melodic. "What makes the desert beautiful," said the little prince, "is that somewhere it hides a well." Unseen by them, Harper and Hazel sat just beyond the doorway, backs to the wall, eyes closed, listening. And when Mason finished reading, Caleb looked up. "You think they heard it?" Mason asked. "I think they needed to." "Will they sleep?" Caleb took a long breath. "Sometimes it's not about sleep. It's about safety. Once they feel safe, rest comes like forgiveness." Mason leaned against the bookshelf. "You used to talk like that all the time. You stopped after Mom." Caleb didn't respond for a long moment. Then finally words hurt more when they echo in empty rooms. Upstairs, Vivian stood outside the twins' door. She could hear them breathing. No screams, no murmurs, just peace. She turned and began walking back down the hallway barefoot, for once silent. At the end of the corridor, she passed the library and stopped. Inside, Caleb sat alone now, eyes closed, fingers loosely intertwined. There was nothing extraordinary about the scene, except for the fact that for the first time she didn't see the janitor. She saw a father, and something inside her, long locked and hidden, whispered, "He doesn't just clean floors, he clears space for people to feel again. He's manipulating them." Dr. Nora Price set her porcelain teacup down with an audible clink that betrayed the agitation beneath her composed facade. The drawing lay flat between her and Vivian Hazel's crayon sketch of Caleb, his mop, and two sleeping girls. It had been placed on Vivian's desk that morning by Bea with a single sentence. "The girls asked me to give you this. Now it sat like evidence." "I know your intentions are good, Vivian." Nora continued, her voice clipped. "But this isn't healthy." Vivian narrowed her eyes. "They're sleeping again. That's progress." Nora leaned forward. "No, that's dependence. You've let a stranger, an unvetted, emotionally untrained janitor, interact unsupervised with two deeply traumatized children. I don't care if he's handing out lullabies or fortune cookies. He's crossing lines." Vivian stayed quiet. Her fingers traced the crayon lines. The mop was crooked. The smiles were perfect. "They say he never speaks to them," she murmured. "And that should alarm you, not comfort you," Nora said. "Silence can be the most seductive form of control." Vivian blinked, caught off guard. "You're telling me," she said slowly, "that a man who hasn't laid a hand on my daughters, hasn't said a word to them, is somehow manipulating them through presence. Children attach to what gives them relief," Nora said, "especially in grief. You need to set boundaries, immediately." Vivian didn't respond, but that night she doubled the number of cameras on the second floor and gave Bea a single instruction: "If he speaks to the girls again, I want him gone." Caleb noticed the new cameras the moment he arrived. He didn't flinch. He just looked at Bea and said, "Security upgrade." Bea hesitated. "Let's call it parental overcorrection." He nodded. "She's scared. Aren't we all?" Bea handed him his ID badge. "Just be careful tonight. I always am." At 9:37 p.m. it happened again. Hazel, barefoot and sleepy-eyed, wandered down the staircase, her stuffed rabbit dragging behind her. She found Caleb in the hallway wiping down the baseboards. She sat on the last step, silent. He didn't speak. She didn't ask. But then after a moment she whispered, "Do you think heaven has doors?" Caleb paused, cloth still in hand. Hazel looked at him, blinking slowly. "Because I dream about one. It's always locked, and Daddy's on the other side." Caleb didn't move. but his voice when it came was low and warm. "Maybe the door isn't locked, Hazel. Maybe you just haven't learned how to knock yet." Hazel tilted her head, but what if he doesn't answer? He met her eyes gently. "Then maybe he's waiting for you to say something first." That was when Vivian stepped into the hall and saw everything. "Mr. Morrow," she said sharply. Hazel startled. Caleb rose slowly, nodding to Hazel. "Bedtime." Hazel hesitated, then nodded and padded back up the stairs. Vivian stepped forward. "You were told not to speak to them." She asked a question. "I don't care. That's not your place." Caleb studied her not with defiance, but with the quiet of someone who had carried too many truths for too long. "They don't need answers," he said. "They need someone who doesn't flinch when the questions get real." Vivian's voice lowered. "You're crossing a line." Caleb's voice matched her tone. "Maybe. But someone needed to." There was silence. Heavy. Real. Then she turned sharply. "You're done for tonight. Leave your badge." Caleb didn't argue. He placed the badge on the side table, picked up his rag, and walked out the door. Bea met him at the staff entrance. "She's scared you're replacing someone she hasn't let go of," Bea said softly. Caleb nodded. "That's not my place." "No," Bea agreed. "But maybe it's your presence." Vivian stood at the top of the stairs long after the lights went out. Her daughters had fallen asleep again. Still. Safe. But in her own chest, something stirred. You don't forget someone by healing. You remember them better. Harper had said something like that last week, a sentence almost too mature to belong to a child. Or maybe she'd heard it. Vivian pulled up the camera feed, replayed the moment. Caleb and Hazel. That line, that whisper. She watched it 3 times. Then she turned the screen off and stared into the dark. The next morning, Nora returned, clipboard in hand, professional smile in place. "I've made a list of licensed grief counselors in the tri-state area. I suggest we replace him with—" "No," Vivian said quietly. Nora blinked. "Excuse me." "I said no," Vivian repeated. "We're not replacing him. Not yet. You're making an emotional decision based on—" No, Vivian interrupted. "For the first time in months, my daughters slept because someone saw their pain and didn't try to fix it, label it, or medicate it." Nora stiffened. "You're letting a janitor undermine professional advice." Vivian stood folding the drawing and slipping it into her purse. "He didn't undermine anything, Nora. He reminded them they were still allowed to feel, and frankly, I'm starting to think that's more than any of us have done." Then she turned heels, clicking her voice firm as stone. "Don't confuse silence with insignificance." Some of the loudest healers whisper. The rain tapped gently on the skylights as if trying to eavesdrop on a house that had stopped speaking. Vivian stood in the hallway, one hand resting lightly on the doorknob to the twins' room. The girls were asleep again. 3 nights in a row. Peaceful. Undisturbed. And yet she couldn't rest. She paced toward the main staircase. The house was quiet, but not empty. Something lingered in the air. Not tension, no, that had been the old rhythm. This was softness, like the walls had stopped holding their breath. She descended slowly, barefoot, her silk robe whispering over the wood. Then she heard it. A voice. Male, low, calm, measured like a heartbeat. Not speaking, but reading. And the fox said, "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." Vivian froze. She followed the sound like a scent. It led her past the grand piano through the corridor to the library. The double doors were slightly ajar. A faint amber glow spilled from beneath. Inside, Caleb sat cross-legged on the floor, his mop set aside. Mason lay beside him, chin on crossed arms, utterly still. Caleb was holding a weathered copy of The Little Prince, his finger tracing each line as if it still mattered what the words meant. Vivian's hand hovered at the edge of the doorframe. "You become responsible forever for what you have tamed." There was no performance in his voice, no affectation, just presence, stillness, care. And then she noticed it. just beyond the corner of the hallway barely visible in the shadows, two little heads, Harper, Hazel, not in pajamas, not asleep, listening. Vivian's breath caught. They weren't afraid. They weren't frozen. They weren't hiding. They were choosing to be there. She didn't move, didn't interrupt, just watched as the man she'd almost fired read to no one and to everyone all at once. Then, as if sensing her, Caleb paused. He didn't look toward the hallway, didn't acknowledge the twins. He simply closed the book gently and spoke. "That's enough for tonight." Mason looked up. They were listening again, weren't they? Caleb smiled. "That's the point, isn't it?" Mason stood and stretched. "Think they'll sleep? They already are. Just not the way we expect." Vivian stepped back as Mason passed by. The boy paused at the sight of her but said nothing, only offered a small, respectful nod like someone who knew adults didn't always deserve explanations. Caleb emerged moments later, startled to see her standing there. "I wasn't reading to them," he said softly. Vivian didn't answer immediately. "Then I know." She looked past him toward the twin shadows disappearing up the stairs. "Do you know what it's like to hear your children scream for 92 nights?" she asked. Caleb's voice was quiet. "Yes." Vivian's head snapped slightly in surprise. She wasn't expecting an answer, certainly not that one. Caleb looked down at the book still in his hand. Mason didn't speak for the first 2 years after his mother died. Not a word. Not even to me. Vivian's throat tightened. "How did you reach him?" she asked, her voice softer now, almost human. "I didn't," Caleb said. "I just stopped trying to fix him. I started just being with him, even if it meant being silent." He looked up, his eyes warm, not sad. "Sometimes healing isn't loud. Sometimes it's just sitting in the dark until the person next to you isn't afraid of it anymore." Vivian swallowed hard. "No one ever taught me that," she said. Caleb tilted his head. "No one teaches grief. We all fake it until it breaks us." Vivian leaned against the doorframe suddenly, so tired it hurt. "Do you think I've broken them?" she whispered. Caleb didn't answer right away. Then gently, "I think you love them so fiercely it's scaring you. And when people are scared they build walls even with the ones they're trying to protect." Vivian looked away. A beat passed, then another. Finally she asked, "What should I do?" He looked at her not as a janitor, not as an employee, but as a father who'd once asked the same thing in a mirror he was afraid to look into. Talk to them. Not as a mother trying to fix them, but as someone who's broken too. Vivian's shoulders sank. "They think I don't miss him," she said, "because I haven't cried in front of them." Caleb's eyes didn't leave hers. "Then maybe tonight is the night you stop being their shield and become their mirror." That night, for the first time, Vivian crawled into bed with her daughters instead of tucking them in from a distance. She didn't say much, just wrapped her arms around them. And when Harper whispered, "Mommy, are you still sad?" Vivian did something she hadn't done in 3 months. She nodded and cried. Harper and Hazel didn't say a word, but they both reached for her hand and didn't let go. The house stood still. It wasn't just quiet, it was reverent, like it had witnessed something sacred and didn't dare speak of it. The marble floors no longer echoed with frantic footsteps. The walls didn't hum with tension. Vivian sat in the conservatory, a cup of untouched tea warming her hands. Outside, dawn was just beginning to stain the edges of the sky in soft lavender. Hazel had slept. Harper had slept. And she had cried, finally. Not alone in the shower, not behind closed office doors, but in the arms of her daughters. And when she woke up, all 3 of them were still there, arms tangled, breathing steady, a family, not perfect, not healed, but real. She stared out the window, but her mind was back in that library. The voice reading gently, the presence that refused to push. The man she had tried to fire. Her phone vibrated. A message from B. "He came in early today. He's in the east corridor." Vivian didn't reply. She stood. She walked. She didn't even put on shoes. Caleb stood in front of the nursery door, mop in one hand, bucket in the other. He looked up as she approached, his expression unreadable but open. "I don't expect thanks," he said quietly. "And I don't want a conversation if it's only about permission." Vivian shook her head. "This isn't about permission. It's about something I should have said a long time ago." Caleb waited. "I've spent months trying to control everything," she admitted. "Every sound, every breath, every shadow. I thought if I kept things tidy enough, grief wouldn't find us." She looked down. "But it did. It crawled under the door anyway, and I didn't know how to let it in without letting it eat us alive." Caleb leaned the mop against the wall. "You're not the only one who thought silence was strength," he said. "But sometimes silence just becomes suffocation." Vivian looked up. "Why didn't you tell me about Mason, or your past?" He hesitated, then answered, "Because pain shouldn't have to be a resume." Vivian's breath hitched. She stared at him. Pain shouldn't have to be a resume. That line would stay with her for the rest of her life. "I read their drawings," she said softly. "They see you as light, safety, even though you never promised them anything." Caleb offered the faintest smile. "Children don't trust promises. They trust presence." Another silence, this one gentle. Then Vivian asked, "What did you say to Hazel that night in the hallway? She won't tell me. She just smiles and says, 'He made the dream smaller.'" Caleb took a long breath. "I told her something I used to whisper to Mason, after he stopped speaking, when he would wake up sweating, heart racing, convinced the world was going to fall apart before breakfast." Vivian stepped closer. "What was it?" He looked at her eyes deep with memory. "I said, 'You don't have to win against the dark. You just have to wait long enough for it to remember the light.'" Vivian blinked rapidly. She hadn't cried in 2 days. That single sentence almost broke the streak. "You talk like someone who's already lost everything," she said, voice barely above a breath. Caleb nodded. "That's how I learned to hold what's left." Later that day, Bea found Vivian standing at her office window holding a folder she'd never seen before. "What's that?" Bea asked gently. Vivian didn't turn around. "Caleb's agency file," she said. "It's thinner than a dinner napkin. No references, just a former job title scratched out and a note that he was recommended for quiet jobs." She paused. "And there's no mention of his therapy credentials or his work with trauma patients." "Nothing." Bea raised an eyebrow. "Maybe because he asked them not to include it." "Why would he do that?" Bea walked to the desk, picked up the folder, then said with a small smile, "Because some people know that healing doesn't begin when they say who they are. It begins when someone else sees it first." Vivian sat down, her voice quieter now. Nora called again. "She wants to know when we're bringing in a replacement." Bea didn't hesitate. "Tell her the janitor is staying, but the silence isn't." That evening, Caleb didn't speak a word as he entered. He didn't need to. Hazel greeted him with a drawing 3 stick figures holding hands under a moon. She pointed to the tallest one. "That's you. We put you in our dreams now. You make them smaller." Caleb looked at the crayon stars. "That's a lot of responsibility." Harper grinned. "We think you can handle it." From the hallway, Vivian watched it all quietly, arms folded, heart full. Then Mason appeared holding a book. "The girls asked if I could read tonight," he said to Caleb. "You okay with that?" Caleb asked. Mason nodded. "You did the heavy lifting. I just want to remind them that stars don't disappear when the sun rises. We just forget they're still there." Vivian exhaled sharply from the hallway and smiled. That night, in the quietest room of the house, a boy read about little princes and foxes. 2 girls curled under blankets that smelled like home. A mother stood outside, no longer afraid to be present, and a janitor leaned against the wall, not to hide, but to rest. Because sometimes what saves us isn't a solution. It's a sentence spoken at the right time by someone who doesn't need to be right, just real. The first snow of the season drifted quietly outside Whitaker House, a soft curtain of white falling over the grounds like a fresh start nobody asked for. Inside, warmth flickered from the stone fireplace in the main living room, where Hazel and Harper were painting quietly at a low table, brushes dipping giggles fluttering. Mason sat nearby, building a puzzle with half focus, half admiration for the twins' newfound calm. And in the corner beneath a tall ficus, Caleb was fixing a broken toy giraffe. Vivian stood in the doorway watching them all. For the first time in months, there was no screaming, no fear in Harper's wide eyes, no sudden clinging from Hazel's trembling hands. The quiet wasn't absence, it was peace. Vivian stepped forward, her heels clicking softly on the floor. Caleb looked up and gave her a slight nod, then returned to the task of gluing the giraffe's leg with surgeon-like precision. She walked over slowly, stopping a foot away. "I used to think healing had to look like progress," she said. "Reports, therapy sessions, measurable results." Caleb glanced at the giraffe. "This leg still won't be perfect, but it'll stand again." She smiled. "You talk in metaphors a lot. Hazard of raising a child who only trusted stories for 2 years. Vivian sat down across from him, smoothing the hem of her blouse. "I almost sent you away," she said, watching him closely, "and now I don't know what I would have done if I had." Caleb didn't look up this time. "You would have survived," he said, "but maybe not." Softened. Vivian tilted her head. "You think I've softened. I think you've stopped trying to parent from a place of control and started parenting from a place of presence." She absorbed that. Then asked the question she hadn't dared before. "Why did you really come here, Caleb?" He finally met her eyes. "I needed the job," he said honestly. "But I also needed to be somewhere where what I had left could still matter." Vivian's voice dropped. "You mean Mason?" "I mean everything." He looked toward the window where snow was starting to cling to the glass. "There's something people don't talk about when they lose someone," he continued. "Everyone says, 'time heals,' or 'they're in a better place,' but no one warns you about the guilt of smiling again, about laughing when you're not supposed to, about the moment you realize you didn't cry that day, and instead of relief, you feel like a traitor." Vivian's throat tightened. She looked down at her hands. "I haven't let myself laugh in nearly 4 months." Caleb's voice was gentle. "You don't have to earn your joy back. You just have to remember it's not a betrayal to feel it." They sat in silence for a while. The fire crackled. The twins whispered. Mason completed a corner of the puzzle and gave a quiet cheer. Then Vivian whispered, "They still talk about their father every night?" "They should," Caleb said. "Grief doesn't ask us to forget. It asks us to remember without bleeding." Vivian turned toward him fully. "Do you think you're still bleeding?" Caleb looked at her for a long moment. Then, for the first time since he'd come to her house, he told the truth he had buried even from himself. "Not from my wife. I bled enough for her. But sometimes I bleed for the version of myself I had to let go to survive." Vivian didn't answer. She couldn't, because it felt like he'd just spoken the thing she had been carrying all along. Her own version of herself had died the night Daniel didn't come home, the sharp-tongued executive, the woman who never asked for help, the mother who measured love in routines and rules. That woman had been strong, but brittle, and eventually she broke. "I don't know who I'm supposed to be anymore," she admitted. Caleb leaned forward slightly. "That's good." She blinked. "Good." He nodded. "It means you're not pretending. Pretending is what breaks people. Becoming, that's where the light gets in." Later that evening, Mason was helping Hazel hang snowflake cutouts from the ceiling. Vivian watched from the kitchen doorway as Harper ran over, laughing a smudge of blue paint on her cheek. "Mommy," she said breathlessly, "we made a family tree." Vivian bent down. "You did?" Harper nodded eagerly and held out a crayon drawing. There were 4 large stick figures, one with blonde hair, one with curly brown hair, one taller with a blue cap, and one with short hair and glasses. "This is me. This is Hazel. That's you. And that's him." She pointed to Caleb. Vivian looked up. He was across the room carrying a bag of fresh pillows toward the guest suite. She stared at the drawing again. "Why did you put Mr. Caleb on here?" she asked gently. Harper looked confused. "Because he stays when it's quiet." Vivian's breath caught. Harper didn't say because he helps or because he's kind. She said because he stays when it's quiet. That night, Vivian sat on her balcony, arms wrapped around her knees, a blanket over her shoulders. Caleb came out carrying 2 mugs of tea, sat beside her without a word, and handed one to her. "I don't think I've said thank you," she murmured. "You don't have to. I want to." She turned toward him. "Thank you. For helping me become a mother again, not just someone who gave birth, but someone who listens, feels, stays." Caleb didn't reply. He didn't need to. Some truths are too full for words. Instead, they sat together beneath a sky dusted in stars, and in the silence they both stayed. The storm rolled in after midnight. Heavy winds battered the windows of Whitaker House. Thunder rumbled like a distant warning. Vivian stirred awake in her room, pulling the covers tighter. She wasn't afraid of storms, but her daughters were, and they weren't in her bed tonight. She pushed herself up and glanced toward the door just as a faint knock echoed. Then a second, more urgent one. She opened the door to find Harper standing there, eyes wide, hair frizzed from sleep, and Hazel clinging to her hand, silent, trembling her thumb in her mouth. "The thunder," Harper whispered. "It's too loud." Vivian knelt. "It's just a storm, sweetie. It'll pass." "But it's inside now," Harper said. Vivian blinked. Inside, Hazel spoke for the first time in days, barely audible. "The loud is back, in our chest." Vivian felt a chill. She reached for them both. "Come, you can sleep with me tonight." But Harper pulled back. "No, we want Mr. Caleb." Vivian froze. Before she could respond, Hazel whispered, "He makes it quiet again." Down the hall, Caleb sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea in the dark, watching the lightning flare across the sky. He wasn't surprised when the door creaked. He didn't even look up when small feet padded across the hardwood floor. "Bad dreams?" he asked. Harper nodded. "Storm's too loud," Hazel murmured. Caleb stood, walked over, and dropped to one knee. "You know what storms are," he said. "Just the sky telling old stories too loudly." Hazel tilted her head. "What stories? The kind the wind remembers, but it doesn't know how to whisper." He gestured toward the big couch by the fireplace. "Want me to tell you a better one?" Both girls nodded. He wrapped them in a blanket, tucked them in together, and sat between them like a guard. Then he began, his voice low and warm. "Once upon a time, there was a little bird who couldn't sleep, because every time she closed her eyes, she remembered the day her wings broke." Harper leaned her head against his arm. Hazel clutched his sleeve tightly. He continued. "But one day she met someone who didn't try to fix her wings. He just sat beside her and said, 'I'll fly low until you're ready.'" Vivian stood hidden in the hallway unseen. She covered her mouth, tears brimming, because she realized he wasn't just talking to the girls. He was telling her story. The next morning, sunlight spilled across the breakfast nook. Vivian poured coffee, hands still trembling from last night's quiet unraveling. Caleb stood across the counter tying Mason's lunch bag. She cleared her throat. "Thank you for what you did last night." Caleb shrugged. "Storms come and go. I just helped them sleep through one." "No," she said firmly. "You helped them breathe through it." He met her gaze, and maybe she added softly, "You helped me remember how to as well." There was a pause, the kind that could lead to anything, a confession, a step forward. But Mason burst in before the moment could stretch further. "Dad, come quick! There's a turtle in the driveway." Caleb laughed. "That's the most Florida sentence I've heard all week." He grabbed his jacket and followed Mason out, leaving Vivian alone with a quiet thought blooming inside her chest. What if peace doesn't come in grand gestures? What if it's just the sound of a voice, choosing to stay when things are loud? Later that week, the twins had their first school assembly since returning to class part-time. Vivian sat in the audience, heart in her throat, scanning the crowd. She hadn't told Caleb to come, but part of her hoped he would. And just before the lights dimmed, he appeared quietly, slipping into the seat beside her. "Did I miss anything?" he asked, breathless. "Just me." Panicking, she whispered back. On stage, the children began to sing. Halfway through, Harper froze. The music kept going, but she stood still, staring out into the crowd, eyes watering, lips pressed tight. Hazel noticed and reached out without a word. She took her sister's hand and sang louder. Harper blinked, then joined in. The moment passed, but something broke open in the silence. Vivian watched it all with her hand over her heart. When the applause thundered, she turned to Caleb. She couldn't have done that last month. She didn't, he said. Vivian blinked. She didn't do it alone, Caleb added. She looked at him, and for the first time she didn't see just the janitor. She saw the man who whispered peace into chaos, the man who stayed. That night, Vivian knocked on the guest house door. Caleb opened it holding a mug of cocoa and a book of bedtime stories. She didn't speak at first, just stood there searching for words bigger than thank you. "I thought I hired you to clean," she said at last. "You did, but what you're cleaning up, I didn't even know was broken." Caleb's smile was tired, but real. Sometimes the mess isn't in the room, it's in the heart. Vivian swallowed hard. "And what do you charge for cleaning that?" He hesitated. "Just a place at the table, and maybe a chance to stay until the quiet isn't so rare anymore." Vivian stepped closer. "There's room," she said. He nodded. But before she left, he called out Vivian. "When storms come again and they will, don't try to shield them alone. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let someone hold the umbrella with you." She stood there in the doorway, letting those words settle deep. Then whispered, "I'll remember that. Do you ever get tired of pretending you're okay?" Vivian's voice barely carried above the low hum of the dishwasher. She was sitting on the kitchen stool, hands wrapped around a mug of untouched tea, eyes fixed on the floor like the truth might crawl out from between the tiles. Caleb, leaning against the counter across from her, blinked. "That's an interesting opener." "I'm serious," she said. "Everyone looks at me like I've got it all together. I run a company. I dress the part. I speak in boardrooms like I own the air. But sometimes, I just want someone to see me." He didn't speak immediately, just nodded, slow, thoughtful. "You ever seen a swan swim?" She looked up confused. "They look calm, effortless, like they're just floating," he said. "But under the surface, their feet are paddling like hell." Vivian let out a sharp breath that turned into a laugh and then softened into something more fragile. "That's me," she whispered. "All paddling. All the time." He stepped forward and set his mug down. "You don't have to do that around me." She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her defenses cracked. Later that evening, the twins were sprawled across the living room floor, drawing quietly. Harper was working on a picture of a big house with a rainbow above it. Hazel was sketching something that looked like a man with a broom, standing beside two smiling girls. Vivian walked in barefoot, a rare softness to her face. "Girls, would it be okay if I read to you tonight?" Harper blinked, "Like Mr. Caleb does." Vivian hesitated. "I might not be as good." Hazel stood and tugged her toward the couch. "You can try." So she did. Vivian opened a book, The Invisible String. Her voice shook on the first few pages, but the girls didn't seem to mind. They curled into her sides, listening intently. Halfway through, Harper whispered, "Is that string real?" Vivian smiled gently. "Sometimes the strongest things are the ones you can't see." Hazel looked up. Like love, Vivian kissed her forehead. Exactly like love. And in that quiet moment, for the first time in a long time, she felt like a mother again. The next morning, something changed. Vivian called an emergency board meeting. Her assistant, Lindsay, followed her into the glass-walled conference room with wide eyes. "Ma'am, we didn't have this scheduled. The board is waiting on quarterly projections." "They'll wait a little longer," Vivian said, firm but calm. The executives filed in, puzzled. Vivian stood at the head of the table, no slides, no graphs, just her voice. "I've spent years building this empire," she began, "and I'm proud of what we've achieved. But somewhere along the way, I started managing profits more than people. A beat. And recently someone reminded me that the most valuable investments are the ones you don't see on a spreadsheet. Whispers flitted around the table. She raised a hand. I'm restructuring the wellness program, expanding childcare services, implementing flexible hours for employees with families, effective immediately. A hand shot up. Ms. Whitaker, with all due respect, won't this impact short-term gains? She nodded. It might, but I'm done measuring success in quarters. From now on, we measure it in impact. No one had ever seen her like this, and none of them forgot it. Back at the guest house, Caleb was fixing the loose faucet again when Vivian showed up in a black silk blouse, heels in hand, hair slightly undone from the wind. You look like a woman who just changed the world, he teased. She grinned. Maybe just the one I live in? Then her tone shifted. Do you want to come to dinner with us tonight? Just the four of us. Caleb paused. I'd love to. She handed him a tie of all things. Mason said you clean up nice. He chuckled. Traitor. The restaurant was quiet, candlelit, warm. Hazel sat between Caleb and Harper, showing him her crayon sketches. Harper insisted on ordering for everyone, which earned a patient smile from the waiter. Vivian watched the scene from across the table. This man who had no title, no wealth, no reason to stay, and yet had become the gravity that pulled them all closer. Halfway through the meal, Harper leaned in and whispered something to Hazel, then turned to Caleb. Can we tell him now? Vivian raised a brow. Tell him what Hazel nodded solemnly. We voted on what Caleb asked. Harper smiled. We decided, if you want to be part of our family, we're okay with that. Vivian's fork froze midair. Caleb's face went still. Harper looked at him with absolute sincerity. You already feel like a dad anyway. The table went quiet. Then Caleb said very gently, That's the kindest offer anyone's ever made me. Hazel added, You make the loud go away. Vivian reached for her glass of water, hands shaking slightly. Not from fear, but from something dangerously close to hope. Later that night, Caleb walked them back to the estate. The stars were sharp above them. The girls ran ahead, racing toward the porch light. Vivian lingered by the gate. Thank you, she said quietly, for not walking away when you had every reason to. He looked at her. I stayed because I saw something worth staying for. She met his eyes. And if I told you that I'm scared, that I've never done this before, not like this? Then we do it. Scared, he said. But we do it together. Vivian stepped forward. Their hands met first, then their foreheads. The kiss when it came was not explosive or cinematic. It was something better. It was earned. It was home. And just behind them, from the top of the steps, Hazel whispered, He did it again. Harper grinned. What? He made the quiet come back. The sun broke through the morning fog like a promise. Vivian stood at the floor-to-ceiling window in her private study, sipping coffee with both hands wrapped around the cup, not for warmth, but for grounding. She watched Hazel and Harper twirl in the garden barefoot, laughing so hard they nearly toppled into the flower beds. Caleb knelt nearby, helping them craft crowns out of clovers and dandelions, his laughter low and deep like a song only the three of them knew. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like a guest in her own life. A soft knock pulled her from the moment. It was Mason. Got a minute? He asked, eyes cautious but kind. She nodded, setting the mug down. He stepped inside and closed the door behind him. I wanted to say something before the whole world does. Vivian arched an eyebrow. That sounds foreboding. He chuckled. I ran into Caleb last night after your dinner. We talked. Just man to man. About Mason hesitated. About what happens when someone finally sees you. Not for the mistakes you've made or the walls you've built, but for the parts of you forgot were still there. Vivian's breath caught. And what did you say I said if you found that? Don't waste it, even if it scares the hell out of you. She stared at her brother, this man who once refused to let anyone near her pain. Thank you, she whispered, for finally letting me heal. He gave a small smile. No, sis. Thank him. All I did was get out of the way. Later that afternoon, a delivery truck pulled up to the main gate. Caleb stepped outside the guest house, wiping his hands on a rag. Vivian followed, curious. 2 workers unloaded a wooden crate. At the top, bold lettering read, "For Hazel and Harper, from Dr. Evelyn Shore." Vivian's eyes widened. Evelyn Shore. The behavioral specialist who had once told her coldly that Hazel's silence would likely be permanent. Inside the crate was a wooden puppet theater hand-carved, painted in pastel hues. A handwritten note was taped to the side, a gift for the girls who taught us all something deeper than textbooks ever could. Their whisper made more noise than any scream. Vivian touched the smooth frame, awed. "They're not just healing," Caleb murmured beside her. "They're lighting fires everywhere they go." That evening, Vivian stood in the middle of her grand living room, usually a space reserved for fundraisers and business galas. But tonight, blankets, pillows, a projector screen lowered from the ceiling. The smell of popcorn and chocolate chip cookies danced through the air. The twins bounced in with their stuffed animals, wide-eyed. Caleb walked in arms full of fairy lights and a mischievous grin. Vivian blinked. "What is all this movie night?" he said. "You've had boardrooms and benefits. Time for a blanket fort and some Lilo and Stitch." Vivian actually laughed. Not a polite, composed laugh. A full, unguarded one. "You're unbelievable." He handed her a roll of tape. "And you're on fairy light duty." They built the fort together, the 4 of them. Laughter weaving through corners once filled with tension. At some point, Harper fell asleep with her head on Caleb's lap, and Hazel curled into Vivian's side, her tiny hand resting over Vivian's heart. "I think she dreams more now," Hazel whispered. Vivian looked down. "Why do you think that is?" Hazel yawned. "Maybe. 'Cause there's finally someone awake when she's scared. That night they didn't finish the movie, but they finished something far more important. A home." Days passed. A new rhythm settled in. Vivian still ran her company, but now she came home before dinner. Caleb returned to his janitor shifts part-time, but the staff noticed something different. The man who once kept to himself now nodded, smiled, sometimes even hummed while working. And people talked. About the billionaire who started holding team lunches. About the janitor who fixed things no one asked him to, who remembered birthdays and brought extra gloves when it snowed. It wasn't loud. It wasn't public, but something was changing, and it was real. Then came the call. Vivian was in the middle of reading to Hazel when her phone buzzed. It was from a restricted number. She frowned. "Excuse me, sweetheart," she said, stepping out to the hall. "Ms. Whitaker," a male voice said on the line. "This is Officer Rayner. I'm calling regarding Caleb Hartwell." Her blood froze. "What happened?" "He's fine, ma'am, but he's at the precinct. There was an incident outside the community center. Someone tried to falsely accuse him of trespassing while helping an elderly resident with her groceries. He refused to press charges, but we need someone to pick him up." Vivian's heels echoed down the marble hallway like gunfire. When she arrived, Caleb was sitting on a metal bench, hands in his lap, head slightly bowed. But when he looked up and saw her, her eyes wild, her blazer thrown over silk pajamas, he smiled. "You didn't have to come all this way." Vivian marched over and sat beside him. "Yes, I did. Because I don't let my people sit in police stations alone." He stared at her. "Your people?" She took his hand. "You think you're just the janitor, but you're the glue that holds all of us together." His voice dropped. "I didn't want the girls to worry. They didn't even wake up," she said. "But tomorrow when they do, I want to be able to tell them their hero came home." Caleb's eyes shimmered. "You really think that—" Vivian leaned in her voice a whisper. "I know that." Back at the estate, she tucked him into the guest bed like a soldier home from war. Gently, reverently, a quiet apology for every time life hadn't. As she turned to leave, Caleb caught her wrist. "Vivian, yes? Why me?" Her eyes searched his. "Because when I was drowning in silence, you were the only one who whispered loud enough." The ballroom was unrecognizable. No chandeliers, no tuxedos, no cold speeches or crystal flutes. Instead, paper lanterns glowed from the ceiling like quiet stars. Strings of ivy and fairy lights twined around the pillars. A small stage stood at the front, framed by children's drawings taped with proud care, some crooked, some upside down. Each one had a name scribbled in the corner: Hazel, Harper, and tucked in the back corner, Caleb's. Tonight was not a fundraiser. It was a celebration. It was a beginning. Vivian stood near the stage, smoothing down her pale blue dress, her eyes scanning the crowd of employees, community members, and local families she'd once kept at arm's length. There was laughter in the air, real laughter. Not the forced kind born of networking. This was something else. Hazel ran past in sparkly sneakers, a plastic tiara bouncing on her head. Harper trailed behind her, holding a handmade sign in glitter pen. "Thank you, Mr. Caleb. You taught us how to dream." Vivian's chest tightened. Caleb stepped out from the wings, wiping his palms nervously on his jacket. It wasn't new, but it was clean, pressed, respectful. Still him. She met him halfway, the soft hum of piano music washing over them. "Ready?" she asked. He chuckled. "As I'll ever be." Then, "Come on," she said, voice low. "Let's give them something to believe in." On stage, the crowd quieted as Caleb approached the microphone. He stood there for a long beat, his hands gripping the edges of the podium. "Most of you know me as the Janitor," he began, voice steady. "Some of you still call me that. I don't mind. I've cleaned floors for 15 years, but this last year, I learned something." He looked over at Hazel and Harper, their faces lit up like candles. Sometimes the smallest hands reach into the darkest corners of your soul and turn on the lights. A hush. Those two little girls didn't need fixing. They needed seeing, and so did I. Someone in the audience wiped their eyes. He turned toward Vivian. And this woman, right here, she didn't just open her home. She opened her heart, even when it was easier to keep it locked. Vivian felt her throat tighten. Caleb's voice grew softer. "Love doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. But if you listen close enough, it never leaves you." The crowd stood in thunderous applause, but Caleb didn't soak it in. He just looked at the twins who were already climbing onto the stage, throwing their arms around him. And then, to everyone's surprise, Harper, once the quieter one, spoke into the mic. "Mr. Caleb isn't just a janitor," she said. "He's our hero." Later that evening, as guests filtered out and lanterns flickered in the twilight, Caleb stood alone near the fountain. Vivian approached quietly, her heels silent on the stone. "You disappeared." "I needed a second," he said. "For what?" He turned. "To ask you something I've been holding in." Vivian crossed her arms. "This sounds dangerous." He smiled. "Is this real?" She blinked. "What do you mean?" "This life, this feeling, us." Vivian didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached into her purse and pulled out something small. She placed it in his hand. A house key. "Home is never a place," she said softly. "It's a choice. And I choose this. I choose you." Caleb stared at the key. "You sure about that, boss?" She stepped closer. "Stop calling me boss." He grinned. "Yes, ma'am. Don't call me ma'am either." "'Kay," he said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "What should I call you then?" Vivian leaned in her voice a breath. "Mine." That night, after the guests were gone and the lights dimmed, they tucked the girls into bed together. Hazel whispered, "Can we do that party every week?" Caleb laughed. "Every year, maybe," Mr. Caleb Harper said, pulling at his sleeve. "Can we call you something else?" He tilted his head. "Like what?" The girls exchanged glances. Dad Hazel said. Vivian froze at the doorway, tears rising uninvited. Caleb knelt by the bed. "You really mean that?" The twins nodded. "Because when you hug us, the bad dreams go away, even the ones that haven't happened yet." Caleb's voice cracked. "Then it would be the greatest honor of my life." Outside the girls' room, Vivian waited. He joined, her eyes still shimmering. "She used to flinch at touch," Vivian whispered. "Now she's asking to belong." Caleb took her hand. "We all are, whether we say it or not." The final scene unfolded in the soft glow of kitchen lights. Vivian poured 2 glasses of wine. Caleb placed a tiny speaker on the counter, pressing play. A Sinatra song filled the air. They didn't speak. They just danced, slowly, awkwardly, beautifully. Two broken people now whole, two whispers now heard, and somewhere in the quiet house laughter lingered. Dreams were no longer silent. They had names, they had voices, and they were finally home. If this story touched your heart in any way, if it reminded you of the power of kindness, the beauty of second chances, or the quiet strength of love, then I'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop a comment below and let me know your words mean more than you know. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be heard, if you'd like to keep seeing more tales that inspire hope, healing, and humanity, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for spending your precious time with this story. I'm truly grateful to share this moment with you. Until next time, take care, be kind, and never stop believing in the power of love.